This time in the Prop Master, well, we pick right up from where we were in the last video, where if you'll recall, we had just managed to paint the whole thing with filler primer. Finally getting to see the whole thing in one color, which, stopped it from being so distracting with the 1,000 different colors of gray and white that were very distracting. So we finally got to take a look at it all in one color to see what it really looked like. So in this video, I'm going to start out by sanding most of that off. And then I'm going to paint it with some more primer. And then I'm going to realize that that's the wrong primer. And I'm going to sand all of that off and then spray it with some more primer and sand a lot of that off. But then we're going to put some silver on it and we'll be done. Also known as, I waited over a month for what video? So yeah, it's not going to be the most exciting video this time, but like all of them, it's got some very vital information that you're going to need if you're going to work on this. Especially the part where I show you precisely where you need to put silver on the jetpack and where you can leave it just primer, because you're not going to need to put any scratches or dings in those areas. I suppose you could just paint the whole thing silver if you wanted to use that much paint, in which case you could probably skip the last half of the video, but what's the fun in that? You know the drill. Like, subscribe, leave a comment. Please leave a comment. Most important thing, leave a comment. Please. But with that said and done, we've got some sanding and some painting and sanding and painting and sanding and a little more painting. And that's a lot, so let's get to work. Okay, so it's been about a week since we painted all of this. It's taken a week because that's how long it takes me to edit the videos, sometimes longer. But you don't have to wait anywhere near that long. You can start doing this 30 to 40 minutes after you put the last coat of paint, last coat of primer on. But let's take a look at this. For the most part, it's really quite good. All those lines that I was worried about through here and across here and stuff, that's all gone. So that was just, looked like there was issues there because of the different colors of gray and everything like that, but it's all good. However, there are some other areas. Let me see if I can zoom in here. So as you can see up here, this is really bad. Definitely have to fill that. And this is not anywhere near as bad, but it still bothers me a little bit, so I think I'm going to try to fill that as well. Also a little bit higher. I think probably this little line that's between these two pieces here, we need to go ahead and get rid of that line. And there are a few little nicks and things all scattered around. And don't forget these pieces here. If you've made your own beacon, probably don't put it on yet. That's a little late to say that now. It's gonna be a lot easier to paint this and everything before you attach it. I had to attach the other one because I had to wire it all up. I suppose I could have wired it up afterwards. It's just a matter of trying to get everything filmed in a way that you'll understand what's going on. So, all of that's kind of fluid as to what you want to do. But since we have to paint all the little details on here, I would say it's definitely don't attach this part yet. But don't forget that you need to, anything that we're doing to this, you need to do to those pieces as well. I can also see that there's a little line here, and that's basically what I'm just going to do. I'm going to be looking on this whole thing, any rough areas. For the most part, this is actually quite smooth now. I spent a lot of time knocking all of that sandy surface off before I put the final coats on. But there are still a few little rough areas that will have to be sanded. And even though these feel pretty good, I'm going to go ahead and go over those with the very fine sanding stick as well. Maybe even wet sand them. The smoother this is, the more it's going to look like metal. If there's any really rough areas that I can't smooth out, I think I'll probably go in and paint those to look like mud splatter later on. It'll be all fine. I can also see that there's some lines back here. Then I want to smooth those out again, so I guess I'll put some more filler there, as well as there's a line that runs. It's okay here, but here I can see the line where these two pieces of cincher were glued together. There's also some little pitting. That's probably something I should show you. There we go, you can see it there. There's some pitting in some of these seams that are, basically just baking soda and CA glue. And I'll go ahead and fill those up with the modeling putty as well. There's nothing really bad. In fact, you could get away with leaving almost all of that. But I think if you're going to do this right, let's go ahead and fill any of the gaps that are obvious imperfections, and not, it's not going to be real believable that it's just from wear and tear. And let's go ahead and get that started. I think I'm going to lay this down because it's going to be easier to get to things that way. By the way, this is just the same Ziploc bags as before. I just folded them over and taped again so that they're a little bit more out of the way. Now, for larger cracks, this is going to need quite a lot of work, and it's still quite narrow. So I'm going to go ahead and use an X-Acto knife, not the sharp side, not the blade, but the back of the blade. And I'm going to see if I can't scrape some of the stuff out of that. I want there to be enough room that I can get the putty down into it everywhere. I don't know if this is 100% necessary, but I'd like to be able to actually get the putty into all of these areas. Some of these areas like that are just barely visible, and I don't know if I can actually cover that up without making a little mound. So I need to sort of dig a little bit out of that so I can get some putty into that gap. Now you can probably see better than I can now. I'm trying not to push so hard that if it pops out of here, I'm going to put a big gouge across here. So if I'm having to push really hard, I'm going to lessen up the force and pull the tip of the blade out a little bit more so that I don't have to push so hard. It might take several passes. And I'm sure this is probably sped up on the actual video you're watching, but I'm not going fast. I'm going this fast. You can kind of see how fast I'm working. I am using the sharp edge now. So I'm just going to kind of go over this whole thing. If I see any areas that are bad enough that the putty's going to have to fill into those, but they're quite narrow, then I'm going to go ahead and try to open that gap up a little bit. I think there's probably some seams here and there that will need that kind of treatment. Here we go. This right here. I'll do the same thing to that area and anything like that that I see. And when I'm done, I'll be back. Now I've gone over everything, and every time I saw something that was more than an indentation like that, I sort of dug it out so that it was mostly little cracks where it's reasonably deep, but it's so close together that you wouldn't be able to really get any putty into. Anything like that, I kind of dug out. Now this, obviously, which was quite a lot of it, you won't have to deal with that, because I only had to deal with this because I decided that I didn't like the one that I did on camera, and I cut the whole thing off and put a new one on. So that's why that's different. You won't have that problem. Some areas to look at. This area here, I'm not trying to fill this. I just wanted to make sure that this little line was visible. It would be, really visible and come across, and then it would sort of be flat. And you kind of need that. You don't have to. It needs to be either completely invisible, or it needs to be a consistent line, preferably a consistent line that goes around. But don't get too carried away digging, this little trench out because remember, this is essentially the glue joint between this piece of the funnel and this piece of PVC. If you dig all of that out and make a nice deep trench, then there's almost nothing holding this thing together. You just want it to be a little bit of an indentation, but visible. Also, after you go through and clean everything out, using the front and the back side of the blade, turn your blade 90 degrees and go over it that way, and that adds a little bit of a bevel at the top so that you can really get the putty in there. Some areas to be mindful of to look. All these areas where we have multiple pieces of Centro laminated together, those are a good place where you'll find little cracks. I had it here, but I didn't have it on the other side, so it's a little bit of whatever happens to, same thing here where these two pieces were laminated together. And even though I couldn't see it before, there were a couple of tiny little cracks here, so I dug those out. Just go over everything. You don't have to, get super, intense about finding every little thing. I mean, once again, this is supposed to have scratches and things. But if you see something that looks like, it shows that this is not one piece of metal, but lots of little pieces glued together, those you'll want to deal with. And now that I have all of that cleaned up, let's take some putty and deal with it a little bit. I'm just going to squeeze some out. You don't have to do the whole area at once. And it helps to have some little tools to help spread things out. Large flat areas will make it where it's flat on, it's equal across. If you have like a little canyon here, you want it to be flat across the top. So if you have something like, like we did with this, where we have a straight edge there, by doing that, we know we're getting a flat, we're cutting that off flat across the top. You do want to move kind of quick on this stuff because it does start to set up fairly quickly. One thing that can be helpful, this is just an old credit card that I cut up. It's about the right stiffness, plus it has some perfectly straight edges, and I don't mind cutting it into little tiny shapes that I can get into areas with. And kind of like we did before, I've got this angled so that it pushes the putty into the gaps. Try to keep it off of other parts though. And notice I'm cleaning this off as I get too much on there. Because at first you want to spread it, but then pretty soon after that, you just want to smooth everything out. The thinner you get this on anything that's not what you're trying to fill, the less sanding you have to do. Let me see if I can stand this up if it makes it easier. And especially on some of these larger cracks, you're going to want to most likely do multiple layers of this. I have so many of these little putty knives, palette knives that come with the cheap brushes that I have, that I'm able to cut them into different shapes. But I suspect that this is going to shrink a little bit after it dries, and I'll have to sand it all down and then put another layer on. But I'm going to go ahead and work on all of these, doing the exact same thing, but it's a lot easier if I don't have to work around the camera. And once I get these filled, I'll be back. So I've finished going over all these areas, and this has had plenty of time to dry. And I'm looking over it, and I can see certain areas like right in through here. So after this dried and cured completely, I kind of shrunk a little bit, and I can see the gap there. It's still kind of a sunken in area. So there's a good chance if I sand all this down, there's still going to be a little bit of a dimple there, or a little bit of a sunken area. So I'm going to go ahead and put some more in the areas like that. I mean, it's also possible that even though it's sunken down compared to the rest of this putty, It's filled the entire crack, but I don't want to sand all of this and then have to put more stuff on top of it and sand it again. So I'm going to go ahead and go over any areas where I can see the gap still there. By the way, if you've been making models for years and are extremely knowledgeable about using, these modeling putties, and I'm doing it wrong, feel free to let me know, because I am very much a beginner with this stuff. I've only recently become aware of its existence, so if I'm doing something ridiculously wrong, please let me know. I mean, it's working for me, but I may be doing 3 times as much work as I need to be. Clean this off a little bit. I've got a little bit of putty stuck to this thing, and it keeps carving little grooves in here, which I don't want. Okay. Looks like there's a little bit right there as well. And once again, I'll go over this whole thing, doing this exact thing, and make sure that I can't see the gaps through the dried putty, and then I'll be back. Okay, I've actually gone over some of these a couple of times, and I can still see, some lines here. I'm not going to just keep doing this forever. I think surely by now it's filled up the gap enough, and this is probably just in relation to the rest of it. I mean, if I sand this off and it's still really obvious, then maybe I'll do it some more, but I think I'm just going to go ahead and start sanding now. Unless it just really, really stands out, I think we'll be fine. I've cut a couple of my sanding sticks up into smaller places so I can get into some of these smaller areas. That's more for just, sanding in general, whereas I think I'll use full-size pieces for the most part to take care of the putty. I've got some water over here that you probably can't see, but this is the medium grit, and I'm just going to start lightly going over everything. I'm trying to do this in such a way that this is forced to stay level, keeping it flat all around. That'll keep me from digging down into any areas that are recessed. And then just, going over everything. The water does a pretty good job of cleaning these off, but it's nice to go in occasionally and kind of wipe stuff off of here. Visually, it looks like it's coming out of the gap before the rest of it, which is very odd to me. But I'm gonna go ahead and keep sanding and see how this works out. When there's quite a lot of it here, so when I go over everything, we'll come back and take a look at it. Okay, so I have sanded everything out as smooth as I could. If you notice, not only do we have some areas where there's putty, but there are areas where I've actually sanded all of the, or most of the filler primer away to where there's just the Centra below it. And that's basically what this filler primer does. It's going to fill in any little scratches and low areas, that kind of thing. And then when you sand everything else, maybe all the way down to where it's completely gone, it will still have the filler primer in the low area, and everything will be smooth. I'm just trying to point that out, that there may be some areas where you sand it all the way down to where there's no more filler primer on here to get everything smooth. But with everything nice and smooth, and I went all the way down to a fine, so everything's got kind of a very smooth surface. I think this is the way to go to get a nice metallic look to this. Part of me is a little worried because you kind of want to sand a little bit of a tooth into your material before you paint it or prime it. But I think in this case, we want it to be nice and smooth. I'm trying to think back of what people will do on cars when they're doing body work on cars. Now that everything is nice and sanded smooth, I'm gonna go ahead and hit it with this just sandable primer. This is no longer a filler primer, but just a regular primer. And you do this the exact same way we did before. We're gonna do 2 light coats and then 1 heavy wet coat. And I'll do the front, and then I'll do the back, and then I'll do the bottom in 3 different passes of all 3 coats. And then hopefully we should have something that we can do one last light sanding with just the fine sanding stick. And we'll be ready to go on from there. Okay, it looked like there was some dust there, but there's not. And just like before, we want to get kind of all the different angles. I'm going to put a respirator on real quick. Okay, back to it. Okay, I'm going to let this wait 10 minutes, put on another coat, wait 10 more minutes, put on a really heavy coat, and then wait 30 minutes. Then I'll do the back, and then I'll do the bottom, and when I've done all the painting, I'll be back. So now I have 3 layers of paint everywhere. Okay, actually, when I actually started to pay attention, that first coat that I put on that you watched was super sandy, kind of like the filler primer, and I got to looking, and that's not the right paint. That sandable primer is very much like the filler primer, and it's got a filler built into it to fill cracks and stuff. So this is I had to take that and sand it all down smooth again, and then find the right paint, which is I like this. This is the Rust-Oleum Automotive Primer. And what I like about it, if you look on here, it's a basic primer, but it is made to be wet sandable. So it's not a filler. It's not there to fill up any scratches or anything, but it is made to be wet sandable, so we can get a nice, super smooth finish on this. But unfortunately, we need to wait 48 hours for this to completely cure, and then we can go on from there. So just make sure that you don't use that previous paint. This is the paint you want. The Rust-Oleum Automotive Primer, and make sure that it says down here that it's fast drying and wet sandable. So 48 hours to completely cure, and then we'll go on. Okay, it's been 48 hours, so we can go ahead and go on to the next step. And can you guess what the next step is? That's right, we're gonna do some sanding. And yes, this is a very tedious thing that's been going on. It's taking a very long time. I'm trying to take my time and do this to get the absolutely best result I can. This is a pretty big project. It's taken quite a while to build. I want to give it the paint job that will make it as good as it possibly can be. Now, I'm doing that because I have the time to do that. Obviously, if you're trying to do something like this and get it ready for a con or whatever you're trying to, do this for, then you're not going to have that much time to do it. And I could easily have, let's go back a little bit. The filler primer, you're going to want to go ahead and sand that down smooth because it can be extremely sandy textured. But for this, I could have painted this, and after I finished the last coat, waited 30 minutes, and then I could go ahead and go on to putting real paint on it. And for most things, it's not going to be an issue. I want to be able to display this and have people walk up to it and look at it and think, wow, that looks totally real. So like I said, I'm trying to get this prepared so that I can put a paint job on it that will be absolutely as good as I can do. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. But with that said, let's go ahead and get to sanding this last bit of primer here. Okay, and you don't want to actually just sand this, you want to wet sand it. So I've got a little container of water here. You want something that's wide enough that you can get, for instance, if you're using sanding sticks, which I will be, you want something that you can get, a pretty large amount of the stick into the water. If you can do this, make sure that you have sanding sticks that says that they are washable. Otherwise, you can use just regular sandpaper. Just make sure that, once again, the sandpaper says that it is wet sandable sandpaper. And I'm going to do this whole thing just fine. If you use anything more than this says is 400 to 600 grit, anything coarser than that, which is going to be lower than 400, is just going to tear the paint up. And by wet sanding it, it kind of lubricates the sandpaper so it doesn't cut into it as much. It also helps to lift some of the paint up off of the surface. It doesn't clog your sandpaper or sanding stick as much, and it's easy to clean off. You're not constantly clogging your sanding stick, which is nice. And I'm not pressing down hardly at all. Not even the weight of my hand. It's just sort of a very slight pressure. And you can feel when you first start, there's definitely some friction there, and then as that goes away, you've smoothed it out. But it still helps to put your hand down here and feel for the areas that are still just a little bit rough. Now, if you want, you can go back with an even finer sandpaper and finish smoothing everything at the end. Once again, I'm not sure. I go back and forth between whether or not I want this to be super smooth. That's going to be what really sells the metallic aspect of this prop, or if I want there to be a little bit of tooth for the other paint to stick to. And I don't have an actual answer for that yet. I'm erring on the side of being smooth at this point. And this is why you want to make sure that your filler primer is really smooth, because if that has a texture to it, then this is going to have even more texture to it, and you're not going to be able to sand this layer smooth because the layer below it is not smooth. Now, saying that, as long as it's still primer when you sand it smooth, if you go through this layer of primer and into the filler primer, that's okay. As long as it's still primer there and it's smooth, it should be fine. The advantage you have with using a sanding stick over sandpaper is that by laying this flat and not putting a lot of pressure on there, I know that I'm sanding a flat surface here. Now there are, considering how rough the jetpack is, it's not perfectly smooth. So if there's some areas that dip down, they're not getting smooth, then you can go ahead and go for just a piece of sandpaper, or to take just the tip of this and get into those areas. I guess it's nice that you can flatten things out this way, but at the same time, if there's a spot you can't get to by doing that, you don't want to try to sand everything down flat with that low spot. You want to get into that low spot. Because once again, there are some areas that will look nice looking like a dent. Every so often I like to come back with a rag or a paper towel and just kind of dry everything off. You definitely don't want the water to evaporate, just leaving a coating of dust afterwards. And once again, it's good to have some little pieces so you can get into some of the smaller areas. Also, some sharp corners help so you can get into places like this, which I could never get into with that rounded tip. And once again, the whole time I'm trying to keep everything flat. I want to avoid getting just the edge down there. I want to keep everything as flat as I can, so I'm doing the whole surface. And just take your time, because this is the final smoothing that we're going to be doing on this. So this is the one that you want to make sure is as smooth as you can get it. Well, I guess I should rephrase that. It's not that you're trying to make it as smooth as possible, but you want to get everything. You want to do as good a job as getting everything smooth. Let's see if I can find my smallest fine piece. There we go. I've got this little bitty piece here, which I can use to get into this very small spot between sort of this piece and this piece. But this is going to be a tedious process, which you've seen me do 100 times. So when I get this whole thing smoothed out, or if I come across something that I think everybody needs to see, then we'll be back. Okay, so I've got everything smooth. I've sanded everything. Every area is nice and smooth. So I think we're done with sanding finally. I have all these other pieces that also need to be starting the painting process. They're also totally smooth. So what we want to do now is put on silver. And you can do that in a lot of different ways. The way I'm going to do it is I'm going to go ahead and brush on some of this mirror. You can find this online. I'm trying to think. I'll put a link to where you can find it in the info area, or the about this video area. You can only get this online. So if, and you're gonna have to get it, I'm pretty sure you'll have to get it from the link that I give you, because they don't make a lot of this stuff. And it seems like whenever I've had to order it, they've had to wait for them to make a batch and then they'll ship it out. But you never know, you might find something on Amazon or something where someone bought some and has a lot of it. But if you can't find that, this is a little bit easier to find. This is the Molotow Liquid Chrome. It's spelled M-O-L-O-T-O-W. This is usually when you find this, it's in a pen, a little paint pen. This is the refill, basically, that you can buy. You might be able to find this at, say, Hobby Lobby or Michael's, something like that. But usually you'll just find the pens. But if you look online, you can definitely find the refill, and you might be able to find the refill at one of those stores. Now, for what we're using this for, you could probably get away with using a, what is it, the Rust-Oleum aluminum. Comes in it's like a brush kind of a paint, and it is an oil-based enamel, and it's very silver. It is not as silver as the mirror or the liquid chrome, but it is, pretty darn silver. You could also go with spray paint. Now, 99% of all of the spray paint cans that you see that say are chrome or silver or who knows what else, mirror, they end up just looking kind of a slightly glossy gray color. They definitely, if you spray that on there, no one's going to believe that it's metal. I can guarantee that. But there are two spray paints that I've found that do work really well for making something, extremely shiny chrome kind of a metal. And that's this Rust-Oleum mirror effect. Now there's a can that looks very much like this, but I think it just says metallic across here or something like that. And it'll show a picture of a picture frame that looks like, it's been spray painted silver. That will not look good. I can promise you that. It's definitely not this. You want the one that says Mirror Effect. It's Rust-Oleum brand. Now, a very similar product from Krylon is this Premium Metallic Original Chrome. It also has a picture frame on it, but this one works quite well also. Now, I will say that both of these spray paints, as well as the Rust-Oleum aluminum, take a millennium to fully cure. You'll wait days and you'll be convinced that it's finally completely dry, and you touch it and it feels dry, and you hold it in your hand, it's fine, and then if you hold it too long or if you grip it very tightly to do something, next thing you know, you pull off and your fingers got some paint on it and there's little fingerprints where you touched it. Now, you'll have a similar thing going on with these two, but these do dry much faster. But even so, you want to give it several days to fully cure before you start masking on top of it. Because what'll happen is when you pull the mask off, it'll suddenly, it's not bad always. Sometimes it actually looks pretty good still, but it'll look like a dull metal. I mean, it definitely won't be shiny. And sometimes I've had to go over that with a new layer of paint. And that goes for all of them. If you do mask it off too quickly, and when you take the mask off, it looks just kind of dull gray. Go ahead and if it's the spray paint, you can spray that into the cap, use a brush, and then paint a new layer on there. Or just, take your paint and, very carefully go back in and paint into those areas to make them shiny silver again. Now, they don't have to be super shiny. In fact, in some cases, that duller look looks more real. On my Boba Fett helmet, there are some areas that really sell it, that it looks metal, but not too shiny. But in general, you want to start out shiny, and if you have to, you can hit it with some dulling spray to take some of the shine down. Now for this, obviously this is not a lot of paint. Now this will go a really long way, but I don't want to waste it. This is kind of hard. It's not cheap and it's not easy to get. If I put an order in now, it might be a month before I get it in. So I'm not going to paint this whole thing. Obviously, if you're spray painting it or have a lot of paint, then just go ahead and do the whole thing. But I'm going to try to conserve this, and I'm just going to paint the areas where I'm going to mask off later on to have the metal shining through. So if you want to do what I'm doing, then you can follow along, and I'll kind of point out where you need to paint and where you don't need to paint. Now with that said, if you just want to go ahead and paint this whole thing, then you don't have to follow along this part, and you can kind of fast forward to where I'm done painting this part and go from there. And then you can just paint the whole thing silver. But either way, I'm going to let my paint sit and cure for probably, I'll give it maybe 2 weeks. That won't be that hard for me because editing takes a week to a week and a half for me to do for these videos. So it won't be that difficult for me to wait another couple of days, for it to completely cure. Obviously, if you have a shorter time frame than that, then I would say you might even want to skip putting the silver on there and just mask off down to this primer, and then go back later on and paint on very thinly, fill in those gaps with some silver at the very end. That would be probably the quickest way that you can do this, in which case you're pretty much done for this video. But let's go ahead and start painting. Okay, so first off, for this piece and my two end pieces, I'm just going to paint them completely. Now I'll take it back. I'm probably not going to paint this bottom edge all the way around, but the tops I'll completely paint those silver. So I'm going to go ahead and set those aside. Obviously you won't need to worry about this unless you're making, this is the wooden one that I did earlier. So I didn't paint it silver like I did that one because I have more time. So I'm going to go ahead and paint this one, and then later on I'll draw I'll use some black paint and draw the little shapes in here for the, this top part, and that'll be it for this. Also for the Moloto, You can brush that on, but if you have an airbrush or access to one, I would airbrush it on. So you kind of treat this one like the spray paint. It's every bit as shiny as the mirror is, but it does not like the brush as much. If you put one coat of it on and don't mess with it, it'll be great. When you start trying to fiddle around with it, it wants to try to get a little clumpy and pull up a little bit. I mean, it's not that bad. You saw me use it when we did the thrusters on the side pieces. So the end effect was fine, but it is not as happy with the brush, and it's a little bit harder to use. So if you have an airbrush, I would go ahead and airbrush with this. But for the mirror, I'm going to use a brush. I've already made sure this was mixed up well. And I'm going to pour some of it into this little container, mostly because I can't fit my brush into this little container. And I'm going to try to do this without knocking the camera over or anything. Now the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to basically put some on pretty much every single edge corner on this whole thing, because those are pretty much a guarantee that they're going to have the paint chips on those areas. You don't have to be precise with this because it's all going to be covered up except for the areas we mask off later. So it's not like if you put a little bit in the wrong spot, it's going to be a problem. It's not. And you can see that this stuff really likes being brushed on, and a little bit of paint will go a very long way. I'm tempted to just do the whole dentals just because, each dental has an edge. I think it might just be easier to do the whole dentals. I'm not worried about getting into these little areas here. Well, maybe this one on the very edge here because it's kind of open, but you're not liable to have lots of dents and dings in areas where it's kind of recessed in. I just looked online to find photos of Boba Fett's Jet Pack. I'm going with the, kind of like a lot of the other build, I'm going with the Return of the Jedi version. I think it's a better looking jetpack. If you're going with Empire Strikes Back, it'll be a simpler paint job. It'll be a little bit easier. I would just look at photos. You can find a lot of them. There is no right way to do it because even in the movie, there's several versions of the prop and every one of them has a slightly different paint job on it. So what I've done is I've found a photo that I recognize some of the dings on throughout lots of different photos, so I could tell it was the same jetpack. And I kind of like the way it looks, so that's what I'm going for. But you may find one that you like, is a little different that you like better. So if I had a better brush, I could just run it down this edge and it would cover, but mine wants to fan out into little fingers. Part of me thinks I could use the paint more efficiently if I was doing the whole thing. it's hard to kind of spread the paint out really well when you're just doing the corners. You can probably see on here that I've taken a pencil and I've gone over sort of the areas where I want to put silver. I'm kind of obliterating some of my lines. Nothing wrong with that, it's just I may have to locate them all over again. Got a little ding over here that I didn't fill. Definitely want to make sure I get some silver under that because I'll probably make it look like a ding. I'm going to do the entire top part of this little ridge here. This is also an edge right here. This is probably going to get completely covered up later, but I'm going to go ahead and hit it now, just in case. Sorry. At least in the front, I'm going to go ahead and do the entire front of these little dentils here. It's mostly the fronts I'm worried about there. So when it comes to painting the silver on, you want to err on the side of too much. You don't want to go back when you're trying to mask stuff off later and go, oh, I've got no silver there, but that's where I need to put a mask. So you can't have too much of this paint on there. Or I should say, you can't cover too much of the surface with silver paint. And I'm still working on that little bit of paint that we poured into this little container. I do want to make sure that I put a nice thin coat of this on there. I don't want a big glob of paint somewhere that's going to show up underneath the other paint when we start, putting paint on top of this. I want this to be a very thin coat of paint. Now obviously I'm not doing the very bottoms here. I guess I'll have to stand this up on something before I can do that. Probably should have primed and sanded the beacon before I painted it silver, but I didn't. For some reason I just painted it silver. Also, this whole top little cap there is silver. At least that's what I'm remembering. It may be gray in the end. And like I said earlier, you know, if you don't want to mess with all this, you could just paint the whole thing. I'm not close to running out of paint yet, but the paint's getting thicker. It's starting to dry, so I need to work faster. Okay, so I'm finally going to add a little bit more paint. Probably not even as much as I did the first time. When it comes to the silver though, you want to make sure you don't get any drips. I mean, if it drips, that's okay, you just need to brush it out. What you don't want is a dried drip somewhere, because that will definitely end your illusion of metal. Okay, let's move this up. Now that I've gotten all those edges, I'm going to go ahead and do this entire top section. It's too difficult for me to tell exactly where the chips are going to be, and I think this is a small enough area that I can get away with just painting the whole thing. Famous last words. This area is mostly gray with some red in the end, but there's going to be a lot of scratches, and it's too many little scratches everywhere for me to paint just little sections. And in fact, it might be even better just to wait till the very end and dry brush some of these scratches on there, but let's go ahead and do what I'm in the process of doing anyway. Definitely want to make sure that you don't have bubbles of paint in these little indentions. Now, I doubt there have been any dings in here, but at the same time, it's possible that it's going to be left metal, so let's go ahead and get this, and then there's a good chance it's just going to stay metallic. I can go up and down on this part, but for this part, I'm wanting to go side to side so that if anything, it's going to have that sort of a spun aluminum kind of a look to it. Now, like I mentioned it before, with the Moloto, if you do this and you don't, if you try to actually brush the Moloto on, you don't want to continue trying to spread it out. You want to put on kind of a wet coat and then go get some more paint. If you keep trying to spread it into a thinner and thinner coat, it will do weird things. This really is great paint. Okay, it's fairly late at night, so I'm going to let this dry overnight, and then when it's easy enough for me to touch it, I'll flip it around and we'll do the front side of that area and finish up putting the silver on. And normally I would say pour your excess paint back into the container, but I really didn't put more than a few drops in each time. Okay, so I will see you in the morning and we'll do the rest of this. Okay, I'm back and I'll get this thing all flipped around. I did not throw away my brush, and I also did not clean it. This is kind of the condition of a brush that I'm going to want later on. Sorry. Something as bad as this is kind of what I'm going to want later on when I'm doing just some little damage areas here and there. I want kind of a beat up brush. So I'm going to go ahead and hold on to that. But let's go ahead and finish up this top part. New brush, more paint. Notice, once again, very little paint in here. And this is not as good a brush as the last one. It's very springy. I'll have to remember that. If I get too much paint on here, it's going to fling it all over the room. Also seems to soak up the paint and not spread it around. It just kind of goes into the brush and stays there. It doesn't come back out. Okay, let's see if this works out any better. I was gonna leave this silver, I would probably go back and do another coat over everything. But seeing as this is just gonna be chips and scratches, I think one coat's gonna be plenty on this. I'm just using up whatever is left in my little container here. Not much, but any spot that looks maybe a little thin, it's usually just because the way the light's hitting it. But anything that looks a little thin. The rest of this I'm going to use some smaller brushes, and I think I can just use those with the bottle itself. Let me readjust the camera. Okay, so the first area I'm going to do is about from halfway here down and go down maybe 2.5 to 3 inches and fill in that whole area. It's interesting how even the slightest amount of texture on that surface really shows up with this silver paint. Okay, now on the other side, about 1/2 inch down and about 1 inch long. We're just going to put a little blob there. Can't see. Usually I don't have enough light, now I've got too much for all this reflective stuff. That looks to be 2.5 inches down and just barely to the right of center. Put a blob there. About 1 inch lower than that. Pretty much right below it, I'll put a blob there. Then you want to come 45-degree angles down and to the left. About 1 inch to 1.25 inches from there. I'll put a blob. And then right down the middle, I'm going to say 6 inches from the top, right in the middle, put a blob. It's maybe, 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch across. And starting, let's say 6.5 inches from the top is where we're going to start. And we're going to end at about 8.25 inches. I guess I'll have to go ahead and put the millimeters on the screen afterwards. And it's going to be just a kind of a circular blob that comes out to about halfway. Then from kind of the middle of that, you want to do just like a ray that comes out. It's maybe a little more than 1/4 inch here, maybe 5/8 or 3/8. And then it's maybe 1/2 inch up here, just quick, maybe a 45-degree angle, maybe a little bit shallower than that. And then trying to figure out my markings here. Looks like just below this area, we're gonna have like a little finger that sticks up and then down to the left. Let's go ahead and make this ray kind of wide enough that it starts out in the middle. We'll just hit that whole area. It's not that much paint, and we can make sure that we get everything that we need. Now, starting at about 8.5, 8.75 inch from the top, which is about here, we're just going to color in kind of a wedge shape here and just do this whole area. Definitely have been easier just to say paint the whole thing silver, but Then if you kind of follow this down, you can kind of come back. You know what, let's just do this whole bottom area here. It's not going to be that much more area, and we can make sure that we've got everything that we need. This is going to be the most distinctive sort of scratched area on the whole jetpack. So I want to make sure that I've got everything available when I start actually sort of drawing the scratch in with the masking fluid. This was one of the scratch that's right in this area here was what made it really easy for me to identify the same jetpack used in multiple scenes. It almost looks like a silhouette of a wolf's head or something. Okay, let's come over here. Basically, I'm just going to flare this out to about 1/3 the width of this whole thing. And I'm doing that at about the widest part here is about the third. Like I said, like 1/3 the distance, 2/3, so then 1/3 at the bottom. And I'm going to kind of round this whole bottom section here so that it's about 1 inch to 1.5 inches deep in its widest part here. This is kind of a pain to kind of describe. I'm really tempted to paint the whole thing, but I don't want to waste that much paint. I'm going to say about 3 inches. Let's actually look and see what that is. More like 3.5 actually. I'm just going to put a big blob here on the side, about 1/2 inch wide blob that goes about halfway out. About 1.25 inches below that, I'm going to do the same thing, make it come out a little bit further, and about 3/4 of an inch from the bottom, I'm just going to fill in this whole area and make sure that it's nicely covered. And then at 4 inches from the top here, and then down to 5 inches from the top, we're just going to make kind of a curving upward little shape. Okay, and I'm just below here, I'm just going to hit a big blob. You could do this whole area if you wanted to. I'm coming out about 1 inch from the center section. And it's just kind of a wedge area, kind of I don't know how to, semi-triangular, wider here and narrower here. Not the very top, but from where the dentals are here, come down about 2.5 inches, and you can just put a little blob that comes out 1/2 inch or so. Looks like we're pretty clean over here. On this side, let's go ahead and just bring this all the way down to about 1.5 inches and just paint that whole area. I'm gonna get this side as well, just in case. I don't remember obviously what that's gonna look like, but it doesn't really hurt that much to get it. And then kind of right in the middle here, this blob's probably 3.5 inches from top to bottom. And I'm gonna hit this whole area kind of down in here, come down about 3 inches, and I want to get both sides. I'm not sure why you'd have a lot of scratches there, but I guess if something kind of hit around here, it would get channeled into that low area and probably scratch going up, so it kind of makes sense. It's not always just the highest edges that get scratched. Sometimes it's the lower edges because it traps things. And do something similar down at the very bottom, kind of coming out around where that, where this piece sticks up out of the floor, or base, or whatever you want to call it. And just run some down that whole area just in case. The difference between the different textures on here reflecting the light is really making it difficult to see where I've painted, where I have it. I can't remember exactly, so I'm going to go ahead and just kind of fill in this whole low area on this side. It does kind of make sense that anything that hit anywhere around here would get channeled into this low spot. This is also the hardest area to sand, so it's probably the roughest part of the whole jetpack. Sorry, I'm kind of jumping around everywhere. Let's go back over to this side, and I'm just going to round off this whole top section here, so that it's maybe from the very top down to this highest area is probably about 1 inch, and then just round it off around that. So about 2.5 inches down from here, I'm just going to put about 1.25 inches. That first measurement was like the middle of this. Let's see if I can do a better job then. I'm telling you where to put this. It starts at about 2 inches and it ends about 3 3/4 inches. And it's maybe 1 inch deep from this corner out, probably more like 3/4 inch. And then about 1/2 inch from there, I'm going to make a really big bulge that goes 3/4 of the way across here, and is probably about 2 inches deep, from here to here. None of this has to be that precise. Although this will kind of determine where your scratches are later on, but that's fine. Next, I'm just going to round the bottom edge here off. So from the very bottom up to there is probably about 2 inches, but then of course it's down to about 1/2 inch on this side. Can you see that? Yeah, I think so. Now we're going to want to do this bottom area here, but I think we'll have to wait till we lay this over on its side to do that, or on the back. Also, in case I don't mention it before or later, I think we're going to go ahead and paint the whole rocket, or the whole tube section down here underneath the Sintra. Might even do that up here on the top, but I'm not sure yet. That might just be a waste. So that I'm just coming down. If you go from this actual corner here, it's probably about 1.5 inches down, right in the middle. I just want to hit that whole area. Okay, let's come up a little bit. I don't think I marked anything. It's hard to get angles of this top area here, so for now, I'm tempted just to paint the whole area. This flatter brush might be a better choice for doing a large flat area, and kind of keep the brush strokes to a simpler pattern anyway. It's just a little flat square brush, but still small enough that it fits into the paint container. And I'm just going to do the sides of this center section just around at this joint right here where it connects, just because I think that's probably a pretty good area where, once again, things would hit and get channeled into that lowest section and then scratch. And over here, at least I do have some marks. It looks like everything's close to the top. Okay, I'm just going to do the top half of this, maybe 1.5 inches to 2 inches at most. I don't see anything on here, but once again, I'm going to go ahead and paint that whole top section just because I might come across a photo somewhere that shows some damage from the top area. And I'm going to come up, sort of the width of the brush across here as well. Don't need to be this precise. I'm trying to get one little spot that I didn't hit. And I don't need to be that precise. Okay, just a couple pieces left, a couple areas that are left. First of all, the top of this, you kind of want to just hit this whole right half. And on this left side, you want to just kind of hit this area about 3/4 of the way across here. So kind of the opposite. You got halfway across here and a little more than halfway across on this area here. And try to get a better look, see what all I had here. About between 1/4 and 1/2 inch from this edge. I'm going to go ahead and hit that. And it looks like, from my markings, that I want to hit everything about 1/2 inch down from the top right here and come about halfway around to the back and just hit this area. It's more than I need, but better to have too much than not enough. Don't want to leave any fingerprints. I've got a lot of marks on this side. I think what I might do is just paint this whole thing. Just because I have a lot of marks and I can't tell which ones are the positive and which ones are the negative. So let's just paint the whole thing. I can feel the other paint getting a little bit more tacky than I would like. So I think I'm going to paint this and then maybe the equivalent on the other side. And I think we're going to have to let this cure after that. Not all the way, but at least, a couple of hours. I like to get all of the brush strokes going in the same pattern so it gives the sort of the grain of the metal effect. Or, if it was spun or ground. All right, let's see if I can spin this the other direction. This one actually doesn't look like it's anywhere near that much, so I'm not going to do the whole thing. I'm going to widen this area where it comes down that back corner so that it's about 3/4 of an inch wide, especially toward the bottom, maybe 1 inch wide at the very bottom here. And I'm going to widen this one so that it's about 1/2 inch wide. And then kind of right here in the middle, I'm going to have it swell out to about 1 inch from the corner out, and about 2.5 inches deep. And it's kind of right in the middle. And then right up in this corner, like if this is the corner, almost comes straight out diagonally to about halfway, and then back in like that. And I think that's where I'm going to stop and let this paint dry a little bit more, because where I come in contact with other pieces of paint, it is really tacky and doesn't want to spread. Should have gotten this yesterday. Okay, and we'll finish this part up when we come back. This has had time to dry enough that I can handle it, so I've spun it around, and let's go ahead and finish this up. Not much left, actually. We're getting pretty close. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to, I don't know what's easier for you to see. I'm basically just going to cover in or color in this whole section from where this cutout is across. I probably should have elevated this whole thing up off the ground. Okay, and there's really nothing on the back. I'm going to put some on here just so I can do something to break up the color. Also, I want something that I can sort of test to see how dry the paint is. That's not going to affect anything if it gets, you know, fingerprints or whatever on it. And then in the end I can, you know, cover it all up. Maybe do it over here just in case I want to add some chips on there, like I said before, just to break up the block of color. Like I said, this would only be for times when it's on display. You know, obviously it's on your back, you're not going to notice it, but if it's, you know, you put it on a stand or something, it might be nice to be able to see the back. At some point I'll have to go in and paint this with something, but I'm not sure what. I could maybe do it in silver. I just want to be careful here and make sure that I don't get anything in the switch itself. Probably should have cleaned that out good. Now I have to try to do this without knocking the camera over. Okay, let's so I'm coming down about 3 inches, maybe 2 3/4, but about 3 inches down to the top, and about 1.5 inches lower than that for the bottom. And it's coming out about, you know, maybe 1 inch from the front. And I just want to color in that block. And then about 3/4 of an inch from where this cutout is. Let me make sure you can see stuff. And I want to come about halfway out and then just angle a little bit back toward the front and then do this whole area. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this over and lay it on its back. So I want to get some of my 1, 2, 3 blocks, or just something I can set this on so it elevates it up. So let's see, how do I want to do this? What I'll do is I'll just lay these down so that this will lay on top of these, 2 in the back, 1 in the front. So it'll be like one will be hitting here, one will be hitting here, and then one will probably be right in the middle here. And I'm going to start out doing, you know, kind of like we did before, just by hitting all the corners. I think I'm going to do this entire thing, because by the time you get this inside corner and then the outside corner, you know, I practically have it all that way anyway. And I'm going to try to do circular brush strokes on this. And for this area, I'm going pretty high up, especially in the center area. I'm basically filling in this whole bottom, sort of connecting this area with this dorsal area. And then I'm just going to sort of feather it down toward the sides. I'm hoping you can see that. Always going back over the areas that I've painted just to sort of feather out the edges and make sure that all the brush strokes are going the way I want. Okay, now the first thing I'm going to do is come about, if you kind of follow this edge down to where it gets here, I'm going to paint this whole section silver. I think I arbitrarily decided that these are all going sort of up and down here. I guess I should finish doing the corners. Okay, now back to filling in some areas. Tempted is to do this whole thing. It wouldn't take up that much more paint, but otherwise it's sort of starting with where your clip is here, the hook that hooks on the scuba harness. On this far edge, kind of come up and about 3/4 of the way around and then sort of curve over there. And then, about this corner here on where this changes directions, come straight down and just fill that area in. And then in this little gap here, we've got a little circle that just kind of comes down. And this whole area is like that because there's just lots of little dings and scratches and stuff all over this side. And there's really nothing on this side over here. It's just the edges, the corners. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and all these areas that I couldn't really get before because it was, standing upright. Now I'm going to hit those. And I can't really tell in the photos what these areas look like because they're covered up by stuff all the time. By these areas, I mean the sort of the tube part, not the central part. But I think I'm going to go ahead and paint those silver, just the whole area, because there's not much to it. And because it's the tube, I'm going to go back to the horizontal, horizontal to the tube. I guess I should finish my sentence there. The direction of the brush strokes are going to be horizontal if the tube was upright. And that's what you call rambling. And I think I'm going to do the same thing on the top part of that tube, although I think this is less important because I'm pretty sure this mostly gets covered up with gray and there's just a few scratches here and there. I don't know that there's any big dings anywhere. If there's any areas that you see that you probably should have hit before, because now you're looking, you got a better view from underneath, so let's hit some of those underneath areas. Okay, and I believe that is everything. I'm showing a little area here at the bottom. I don't know what that is exactly, but I'm just gonna put a stripe down the middle here just to make sure. Like I've said several other times, it doesn't really, if you have too much silver, that's okay. But if you don't have silver where you want it, then you've got a problem. It's not that big a problem. You just don't put that scratch or ding there, but I think you understand what I'm trying to say. Okay, I think that's everything. Let's give this some time to dry, and then we'll take a look at it as a whole. Okay, I realized I didn't show you painting these pieces here. I talked about it, but I didn't show anything. This is a good way that you can paint this. Put it in your drill. Don't go too fast because you don't want to sling paint around. You need more paint. That's how fast I'm going. I'm probably going to speed this up in the video, but this is about how fast I'm going, so not very fast. I didn't put that last coat of primer on, the sandable, wet sandable primer, the automotive primer, I guess that's what it was called. So you can see there's little microscopic, almost little pinholes all over. Now that's fine for this, to be honest, but if I had used that last sandable primer on this, it would not have all those little, you know, it would look just like a solid piece of metal instead of like a cast piece of metal, which is kind of what it looks like right now. But I just wanted to show you that's a good way to paint that. Okay, once this dries, we'll take a look at it. I've still got to paint the little end caps down here, but that's pretty straightforward. Okay, everything's good and dry here. It's been a couple of days, so I feel reasonably comfortable setting this up on the end without it doing too much damage. I've tried to pick some areas where there's not a lot of silver paint to sort of, you know, set this on. And I also know that after all the work that we did in this video, it doesn't look like much. I mean, some parts are really nice and shiny, and it would have looked a lot better if I painted the whole thing silver. And not only that, it would have been a lot shorter video. But that just would have wasted a lot of paint that I didn't need to waste, so I wanted to, you know, go kind of sparingly with it. But hey, in the next video, we'll start to mask stuff off where the damage is going to be, and then we'll go in and do the overall masking, or at least for the first color, and then we can start putting some, you know, actual color on this jetpack. You know, we actually start the process of finishing this thing up. And if you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to list them below down in the comments section. Not only does that really help the channel quite a bit, it's also basically what motivates me to keep making these videos. If I don't get any interaction with it, I kind of feel like no one's watching, and it makes me not want to make any more videos. But yes, please leave your questions and comments, and I will reply to them as soon as YouTube decides to let me know that you've sent them. And you know the usual stuff: like, comment, hit the notification bell. And in the next video, we'll get to actually start putting some color on this. But until then, thanks.